how Africa perhaps is also going to get pulled into the fourth industrial technology. How do you see technology, though, coming into play as the CFTA becomes a reality for continental integration?
So first of all, thank you for the invitation and congratulations to the event. So for us, we are a telecom operator. So our big innovation is building these highways of transmission. So we are building submarine cable systems that are linking the west coast of Africa and also to link the Americas. So we installed the first South Transatlantic cable between Angola and Brazil, and we installed also cables from Brazil up to America. So in fact, what we are doing is creating a hub of technology, a hub of communications based in Africa. So again, as also Ethiopia Airlines, Angola Cables is developing all these business cases based on serving Africa with communications. And I think, again, if we have the chance to now starting trading between ourselves with a more efficient way, means that if the rules are the same for all of us, then we have more opportunities to develop more business. Because what happens before, or what is happening still today, is that each of the markets have different type of rules and different type of reporting. So if we are all able to report in the same base, then we have an equal base to start trading properly. And this is a very good income for our future.
Tony Atta, we heard this morning, and of course, many people have been wondering about Nigeria's seemingly reluctance to, join in with the CFTA. Your thoughts on that? What is going on there?
Thank you very much. I will not speak for Nigeria immediately, but I think I need to put a few things in perspective. So I arrived Kigali, first time in Rwanda yesterday. You met the immigration officer, and he says to me, what's your company? What do you do? I say, I'm the CEO of Nigeria LNG. And he said, Nigeria what? And that told me a lot, because I had to introspectively start to reflect. Just listening to the statistics around intra-Europe, business is at 65%, Africa 15%. All my business is outside of Africa. And that's got me thinking. But essentially, I feel a need to perhaps say a little bit about the company so that next time you will not ask me Nigeria what. It's Nigeria LNG. We're a gas company. Our vision is to be a global player, helping to build a better Nigeria. But I think with this kind of conference, you have to start thinking, helping to build a better Africa. And I think there is some scope in there. We're currently top 5 in the world of LNG. And LNG is really liquefied gas, which is breaking barriers, which is why when you talk of CFTA and listening to the president of Ethiopia this morning saying all these barriers and boundaries are artificial, they are colonial. We need a new mindset in Africa to move away from that old thinking that is hindered by thick borders and barriers. And I thought that was quite instructive. For us, we provide energy to the world. But now, when I sit here in a conference meant for Africa, I just realized that I'm providing energy for the rest of the world. And that is where the opportunities around a clearer, workable CFTA would come in. Because I have no barriers in terms of our product. We liquefy, put it on ship, and sail to where pipes cannot get to. So essentially, we're a virtual pipeline kind of company. But it's very important to understand that, in our view, we believe that energy integration by far is the biggest catalyst for integration in Africa, whether you look at Africa as a region on its own or you look at the sub-region. But the opportunities are huge for Africa, but then the disadvantages are also there if we do nothing, because in today's world, with the changing energy mix and energy transition, the world is moving on. And we know today that more than half of Africa has no access to power. So access to energy, in our view, is perhaps the biggest opportunity. And we really need to work that in terms of how do we make energy available in Africa. For us at Nigeria LNG, is something we take away to say, how can we do more business within Africa? We're trying to grow from 22 million tons capacity to 30 million tons. that extra 35% capacity growth is opportunity that we can actually bring to Africa to make sure that access to energy gap is actually bridged. So we see LNG as that longest bridge that will help Africa in terms of energy, and the opportunities are immense with Nigeria LNG.
And we're still going to ask the Nigeria reluctance in a minute. But I do want to come back to you, Mr. Gabriel-Mariam, because part of the continental initiatives surrounding the CFTA include some complementarity protocols, such as the open sky policy. But up until this point, though, there is quite a reluctance by African countries, so to speak, to sign on to implement the open sky policy. What is standing in the way of full implementation of SAM?
I think they go hand in hand. CFTA is complementary to SATM, and SATM, if it is fully implemented, is also complementary to CFTA, because air travel follows economic growth, GDP growth, or air travel is an engine to economic growth. Efficient air connectivity is very important for economic growth, as we have seen continents. When we come to SATM, we used to have YD before, Yamoussoukro Declaration, for more than 20 years, signed and filed, but never implemented fully. So now we have SATM. So one may ask, what is the guarantee that SATM is going to be implemented fully better than YD? While we still have our skepticism, I think now SATM is placed in a better position to be implemented because, number one, it is now driven by the African Union. So about 30 countries have already signed. And we see better appetite from countries to implement SATM than before. And the way the African Union is driving it, by the way, we are all behind it. And we were among the first to initiate SATM with the African Union in Addis Ababa. So the implementation mechanism now is much better than before. The African Union is working with its own branch, the AFCAC, the African Civil Aviation Commission. And also now there is better mechanism of implementation like dispute resolution mechanism, which handles any dispute if and when arises between countries. And when we see the potential now, it looks more realistic. But I agree with you, there is still reluctance. Countries which have airlines in different sizes want to implement SATM. And those countries which are in the initial stage of establishing airlines have some reluctance. But I think, I believe that there is a better opportunity now to implement SATM.
China Global Television Network. From broadcast centers in Beijing, Washington, and Nairobi. A unique global perspective. 6 channels and a video content service. News when you want it and where you want it. On TV screens, websites, mobile platforms, and social media. CGTN. See the difference.
Diane, we talked earlier about the question of financing, and you mentioned that part of the reason that probably Tony Atta was talking about, that not many people at the airport knew about his company, was that a lot of the companies in Africa are still very small. But one would be asking, as the continent opens up, there is going to be a need for expansion of these, companies and industries. What is the financing going to come from? Are there innovative ways to say in terms of seeking for financing?
Yeah, I think all banks, not only in the region, the East African region, but on the continent, are seeing this as an opportunity because growth will have to be financed, and all banks are looking at businesses to finance. So in terms of funding, I think most banks, including our own, are looking for funding. We went through a rights issue last year. We also listed on the Nairobi Securities Exchange, which also a sign of integration. We are getting investors not only from Rwanda, but from all over the world through the Nairobi Securities Exchange. And this is giving us a bigger capacity to lend. But what we are doing also is to work with a number of DFIs. We had a signing ceremony this afternoon with the European Investment Bank, a line of credit for the long term to be able to support all these businesses that are looking for expansion. And again, as I was saying, when we look at the pipeline of the businesses we are financing, we have a lot in manufacturing, in energy. But beyond that, I think we need to sort of increase our appetite because many of these businesses, I think it was shown by the survey by Deloitte, are still family-owned, not with the right structures of government as any bank would like to see. He was saying that many companies don't have a board and don't see the need of having a board. So we'll have to adjust also our risk appetite to these small companies, African companies, family-owned, and to see how we can still support them. Now, technology here is really bringing some change because today we are able to look at the business but also at the flows of transactions around that business. We are using data and analytics to say, we see this company growing, so we are able to say, let's lend, even for the long term, let's take on some risk. So technology is key, and also diversifying our sources of funding as banks.
Antonio, you mentioned earlier that this is a clean slate now for the continent to, to build its own model, in terms of creating greater growth. Develop that thought process for us.
So what we are saying, we was talking, is that we in Africa miss the third industrial revolution completely. So we don't have factories in Africa. So the ones that we have are too small. So now we are in a phase to change to the fourth industrial revolution. And in the reality, everything will be put in question. Even the society that we are living today, it will be changed. So today we are training people and we don't know how to train them because we don't know what will be the work for the future. So for us, in terms of Africa, we have probably, our population is growing. It's one of the highest rate growth in the world. We have a very big young population, and we have this huge opportunity of changing the status quo of the society. So in terms of what will be happening is we have to engage or to take this wave, okay, and learn with it, and making for us the opportunity to grow in areas that we don't know today. For example, we was talking about financing projects in Africa that normally when we go to ask for finance for the big banks, they want to finance big amount of big tickets. So in Africa, we don't have in the private sector big tickets to be financed. Most of the business are medium to small enterprise business. So we have to rearrange the model for us in order to be growing up in a faster way. But we have today the full opportunity because today engineers could be in Nairobi printing something that is in Rwanda and selling in Angola. So they don't have to go out from his own place. So we have all this opportunity that we have to take. I think the future for Africa is quite brilliant because we have now to take the new wave and we have all the ingredients to take it.
Right, Tony?
We are not a small business by any chance, I will say that. So we're a $7 billion revenue per annum kind of business, guaranteed $2 billion dividends year on year. So, I mean, easily a Fortune 500 company if we were publicly quoted. But I think in terms of where the opportunities are for us, it's really around the growth. Because if you look at the gas business is pretty long term. So a lot of the contracts that we have today are contracts that were signed about 20 years ago. So most of them will be coming to term in the next 3-4 years. They will have to be renewed. Therein lies the opportunity for us to redirect that mindset and start to look inwards. But on top of that, we're growing capacity from 22 million tons to 30 million tons. Therein lies the opportunity to bring some volumes into Africa. But I think I just like the way you referenced it. Today, more than half of Africa has no access to power. That's over 600 million people. And what the future prediction is, by 2050, will be more than 2.5 billion. Where is the energy going to come from? Is there enough? And if you look at the changing energy mix and energy transition, the world is going to grow. We've seen that for Africa already. The world is going to need more energy, but the world wants it cleaner. And a lot of the current energy types will no longer find the place of use in the future. But gas is clean, gas is cheap, and gas is available in abundance, especially in Africa, or at least Nigeria, we can talk about. But if you look at the population growth relative to energy availability or access, by 2050, Africa will be 25% of the global population, but the prediction is that we will be only 6% in terms of energy utilization. I think there's something wrong with that picture, and that is where my kind of company will have a role to play in terms of looking inwards and bringing more energy directly into Africa.
Right. I want to get a thought process going here regarding what Antonio mentioned earlier in terms of starting to create a new model for the continent. Global dynamics are now changing. The CFTA is coming into force at a time when globalization in some parts of the world may be waning. The United Kingdom is about to leave the European Union. China's economy is slowing down, albeit China is opening up further even this year. So how does this affect, though, Diane? How does this affect Africa's partnership, given that Africa's share of the global trade as it stands now is only a paltry 3%?
Yeah, that's a good one. Because of the global share of Africa's GDP, when you look at the whole world, we are more of a taker. We are not a giver. People are looking at Africa as a bloc and all want a share of what they can do on the continent. So we have here the opportunity to say we are a united bloc, and these are our terms. If you want to invest here, these are our terms. This is how we want it. And this is how we want to implement whatever we're doing together. So it's absolutely important because now sources of growth globally are mainly in Africa, on the continent. I think we're discussing this morning, the world workforce will reside on the continent of Africa in 10 to 15 years. We'll have the largest workforce globally. So people are looking at us as a force to reckon. And we also need to take this opportunity to speak with one voice and to make sure whatever investment is coming our way is done and made and implemented at our terms, not at everyone's terms. So it's really important to speak with one voice. And again, as I was saying, this CEO forum is making sure people come together, people get to know each other better, so we can do business together.
Right, Mr. Gabriel Maria.
Globalization is something that we cannot stop or we cannot isolate ourselves from. But I agree with Diana that first we have to get our house in order. Africa has a lot of potential, and Africa is growing very fast. When we take the airline industry, for instance, the share of the global airline industry in Africa is very small, less than 3%. But even from that, 80% of the traffic between Africa and the rest of the world is controlled by non-African airlines. All African airlines put together, small, big, mid-size, were only 20%. This shows you how imbalanced the trade flow, and I'm sure it's almost the same in other sectors of our economy. So we have to get our house in order. We have to speak with one voice. The African Union has, the African Union is as old as the European Union. But when we see the progress, we are way behind than the European Union. So we have to move faster in terms of integration. The African Union is talking about Africa integration 2063, but that is very, very long. So we have to increase the speed there.
Right. I'll get two very brief comments from you, Antonio Nunes.
So in terms of wrap-up, what I will pass to my CEO colleagues in Africa is that we have to train our people. And we have to give them the skills so that they will be able to stay in the future and to sustain the future. And a part of giving the skills to the people is to building up the ecosystem so that what we are building doesn't disappear from us. So this is my ramp-up point.
All right, Toniata.
All right, so I think there's something wrong with the 2063 date. I think Africa needs to do much more than that. And I think from all indication, we now know that the risks really are too high for Africa to want to stay the same. So there has to be something said about where we go with the integration. A lot has been talked about logistics, infrastructure, but I think logistics, infrastructure, even IT without energy will not give us that game-changing progress that we're looking for. So essentially, we believe that energy integration is actually the catalyst for African integration, and that needs to come into the discourse to give Africa a fighting chance of stepping forward. It's about leapfrogging. We've done it in the banking world. We've done it in IT. There is opportunity if we piggyback on energy. I would say that.
All right, we're going to end it there. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. My panel has been very insightful. We're going to say thank you to them. A round of applause, please. To Mr. Tewolde Gabriel-Mariam, the CEO of Ethiopian Airlines, Dr. Diane Karusisi, the Chief Executive Officer, Bank of Kigali Group, Mr. Antonio Nunes, Chief Executive Officer, Angola Cables, and Toniata, Managing Director and Chief Executive Officer of Nigeria LNG. We still want to know why Nigeria is reluctant to get on board the CFTA. And thank you very much, members of the audience, for your participation and your attention. We'll leave it there and have a good evening ahead. Bye-bye. And that's all we have time for this week on Talk Africa. A big thank you to my expert panel of guests, some of Africa's top CEOs. And remember to keep this conversation going on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. And join us again next week for more Talk Africa. From me and the team here in Kigali, it's goodbye.
This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.